Last week, Matthew Peterson abandoned me and went to Washington, D.C. to spend some time with our Blaze senior politics editor and D.C. correspondent, Chris Bedford. So Chris joins us now. You guys are just going to talk about what you guys did in the swamp without me last week. So, the floor is yours, gentlemen.
We had so much fun without you. We got into all kinds of trouble.
Yeah.
In fact, I had to spend most of my day today catching up on things that I honestly should have finished on Friday. But we were gallivanting around town, and we happened to head into the White House at a pretty interesting time for the country, for international relations. We walked in essentially at the beginning of another major step in the global reset that we are seeing, where America tells client states that they are not equal partners and will have to listen to us as senior partners. And as we were crossing from the old executive building, which is the big, massive mansion you might see in some pictures of the White House, right next to it, much bigger than the White House. As we were walking from there across the White House lawn, Zelensky was being ejected from the White House. There was security barriers everywhere. The place was absolutely abuzz, and it was a pretty interesting time to be in Washington.
Yeah, and we should say, that morning started for me at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast with J.D. Vance, maybe a slightly different J.D. Vance, but related in this way, and we were speaking about this together on Friday. So J.D. comes into the Catholic Prayer Breakfast Friday morning, and he talks about his conversion, great stuff, but he talks about the Pope, very magnanimous, says, I remember the Pope actually had great words as a spiritual leader, even though we disagree, doesn't get into a tit for tat or fighting with the Pope. It's actually fairly moving, even though obviously they disagree on immigration. JD doesn't change his stance, but, that was great. But the middle part of Vance's speech in the morning relates to his afternoon, because what he said there was, why should Catholics and really Christians be for Trump? It's not just the pro-life thing. He went beyond that and said the biggest thing is that the United States is going to defend Christians throughout the world, and it's going to be for peace. It's going to be for peace and not warmongering. And then he, lo and behold, as it turns out, we both follow him over to the White House, and you have this outburst that will go down in American history as a kind of turning point of what America First foreign policy looks like moving forward. And it was very interesting to hear that in the morning and then hear the very strong words later on in the afternoon.
This is something that's been neglected in American foreign policy for so long. The idea that the United States should defend Christians, I think it's partially based on this idea that because Christians, for most of American history, it's becoming a little less so recently, haven't been persecuted and are a majority in the United States, that they ought to be ignored. That we can go abroad and we do promote social values all the time in our foreign policy, whether it's democracy promotion or whether it's, this is a really big one, LGBTQ promotion. We'll basically help overthrow European governments if they run afoul of that sort of ideology. And we talk about the West a little bit, but we leave out really the font of the West, the source of the West, Christianity. That has been absent from our foreign policy for a long time. And it's not just in places where Christianity may be preserving ideals of Western civ. It's also the most persecuted religion on the entire planet. Every single week, priests are getting killed, churches are being attacked in Africa, in Asia, in the Pacific. This is a common occurrence. And the United States has generally sided against Christian populations, whether it's Bill Clinton in the 90s in Serbia and Bosnia and Kosovo, or our foreign policy basically across the planet. So to see a U.S. president say, you know what, we're actually interested in defending this deeply attacked population, this group that has no voice, is really no voice in a lot of different places. Like, for example, in the Israel-Palestine conflict, they're the only one there who doesn't have a military force. They're the ones who are have the least room at the table. To have a vice president of the United States come out and say that is a wonderful thing. And then to see that fast forward and then play out in action, that's the thing, is the Christianity properly understood, not the way it's explained to you by folks who've never seen the inside of a church, but properly understood, is a muscular idea that is confident, a religion that is confident in itself and is willing to overturn tables. So you take that insistence on peace, you take that insistence on not funding wars continuously forever and meat grinders, and sometimes you're going to see an argument with that. And that's how it played out in the Oval Office, where You've got two Christian populations fighting each other to the death in a meat grinder. The president in the United States is funding it, and they're saying, hold on a second, we're not going to do that anymore. That's how you see it start to play out in real life.
There's so much more to say about this topic, and of course, what happened on Friday as it comes out. We forget it's only 3 days. It's only been 3 days since this, but we should say a few things about that trip. One is within the White House complex itself, you could feel the electricity, and people had the TVs on, and they're sort of watching, just like people at home, going, "Oh my God, I can't believe this! This was not, some planned event. This was not some setup. This was something that people really, really couldn't believe." That was palpable. The other thing that would be interesting for Chris to talk about is, the interlopers coming into D.C. like myself. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. The reason I like to go there now is because everything's electric. I mean,
it's true.
This isn't bragging about going to parties. It's just if you go and you're part of this movement, you're seeing everybody. I mean, it's Michael Knowles was at the cigar bar the night before. And then Mike Cernovich had a thing, cigar bar the day after, right? And you just see these different parts of the coalition coming together and starting to realize that they're actually in power, and there's a kind of excitement with that I think is just genuine, and it's kind of almost, it's not naive, it's earnest.
Yeah, Bedford, what is it like seeing the conservatives take over DC?
It's so strange, and I love it. And you're welcome from all of us people who have been slogging it out in the trenches for the last 20 years, where everyone says, why are you in Washington? Why don't you move to Florida? Why don't you get out of there? It's just a swamp. It's like, well, someone has to be here. And someone has to make some noise, dig some trenches, and be able to put together comprehensive bar hopping guides for our visiting dignitaries from the free states of Texas and Florida and beyond.
Very important.
But to see it, I left D.C. after 18 years of living there. And moved to Northern Virginia, which was like a time warp back to the late 90s or early 2000s when Republicans and Democrats disagreed but lived next to each other. Their children socialized together. There's not as many political signs in the yards, and there's not as many. Most of the flags here are American flags and occasionally sports teams' flags. Very different from Washington, D.C., which is a completely toxic, politically awful city. And to see something so ascendant right now, it's kind of must be like when you're living through the heyday of punk rock or something like that. When you go from a small group of people who are just pushed aside to seemingly everywhere, top of the charts, walking around popular, you see it. And there are leaders now for the MAGA movement in technology and business in Silicon Valley. Of course, there's always the thought leaders out there. You see it in politics, you see it in government. You see it in culture and in comedy. It's a pretty wild time to be living through, and I look forward to once the years have passed. I don't want this to end, but looking back in 20 years, trying to explain to people what it was like to hand out so many white pills so quickly to so many people, but absolutely convinced it was over.
Yeah,
including myself.
Yeah.
It's going to be an incredible story.
Going from the end of the country to whatever is going on right now in D.C. is one heck of a U-turn there. But, we've been talking about D.C. and the Republicans and Trump mandate for so long. I think we should check in on the Democrats. Here's a recent appearance from fan favorite Representative Jasmine Crockett on MSNBC.
So, unfortunately, we have someone that is occupying the White House. And as far as I'm concerned, he is an enemy to the United States. He swore an oath just like the rest of us. But right now, when you are literally putting us at risk, all because of what? Because you want to convince your followers that you should be a dictator too, that you should never leave the White House because you don't believe that elections should take place. I don't really understand what is going on, and I don't know what it's going to take to get people to wake up.
Literally. In your latest Beltway brief, you said that Democrats need Trump. So why is that?
So they need a Donald Trump. They need a great leader. They need someone who is capable of changing their party. So over the past few weeks, Democrats have been trying to figure out what the future is for their party. The best time in the world to do that is after you have been thrown out of office as an incumbent. There is no better rejection of your ideas than that. And that's when you're supposed to the reformers within your party are empowered. And the people who have been saying everything is fine, it's clear sailing, have egg on their face. They're in trouble. Now, this, of course, happens to Donald Trump. And it was a very difficult fight for those people who were saying this is not right. This job is not finished. I remember being on phone calls before that saying, well, the number one thing to do is to basically go into your Crusader castle, surround it with spikes and close the curtains, get ready for all the Bill Kristols of the world to come back and try to take the GOP. The Democrats are going through a similar moment right now where they've now been ejected, and there's a bunch of reformers who are saying, well, hold on, what are we doing here? Maybe we ought to not attack the United States left and right. Maybe we ought to not have this massive focus on identity politics. Maybe the hard left professional activists who run our town halls, run our nonprofits, and staff our offices are leading us astray. Maybe the demands of small dollar donor activists are actually completely repugnant to the American people, and they're being pushed back against. And you understand that, right? The way that you change a party is not simply with coming up with good ideas for how things probably ought to be better. You have to break bones. You have to move people. You have to really not kick in doors to change things. Donald Trump, over the last 8 years, has fundamentally changed the Republican Party to the incredible resistance of Washington, D.C. Republicans with the backing of the base. And the only way this party has gone from one of wars abroad and democracy promotion and free trade and a kind of a white middle class party to a working class, multi-ethnic party that is in favor of tariffs, that is more peaceful, and is emphasis on nationalism and reindustrializing and restrictionist immigration policies, is because of the force of Trump backed by the demands of the people. The Democrats don't have that right now. They don't have an FDR who can come in after 3 terms for Republican presidents and change the party in the way it actually operates. They don't have a Ronald Reagan who can step over Watergate and Gerald Ford and kind of reshape the party. In order to take those ideas, they essentially need a Donald Trump.
So 60 seconds, time we have left here. I mean, remember the lady on the plane I was talking to you about who admitted to me after going through all the NPC, shitlib sort of comments. She said, she admitted if we had someone who was just reasonable on the border, we would have won. That's the kind of leader you're talking about, right? But the problem is we feel this in our bones almost more than we can analyze it. The problem is that's not yet allowed. So if you're right, this person would have to come out of nowhere. Am I wrong?
Yeah, you look at the top people who are running. I mean, in poll after poll, there's only been 3 national polls done since the inauguration. Kamala Harris is leading by double digits for the potential Democratic nominee, and she's someone who's been rejected by the American people. She's hard left. She was a failure in the border. Second place is basically Pete Buttigieg, someone who removed his pronouns from his bio after the Republican victory, but who's kind of a robot, extremely corporate, certainly not a visionary leader. In California, you see Gavin Newsom winning the Democratic primary polls, of course, but this is someone whose state's got soaring crime, soaring homelessness, and his biggest city just burned down on his watch. So none of these people are the transformational figures that Democrats need, and I don't see where from the wilderness this person comes.
Well, that means that the fun in D.C. can continue for a little while longer, and maybe next time, I'll go too.